I've been a police officer most of my adult life. Small town policing isn't what people think. It's not endless car chases or shootouts. Most days it's just paperwork, noise complaints, the odd petty theft. But every so often something happens that reminds you how far away you are from any help. In our little town, we were the first and last line. If someone goes missing, we're the ones who comb the fields, knock on doors, and when the call comes in late at night, head into the dark alone. I've done searches in freezing rain, in waist deep snow, even waded through swamps looking for the lost. You tell yourself you've seen it all, but this was different. I've kept it to myself for years, partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I didn't want to believe myself. But lately I can't stop thinking about it. The sounds, the movements in the dark, that feeling of being herded. So I'm going to tell it exactly as it happened. It was late afternoon when the call came through. Another hiker gone missing. Out here, it wasn't unusual. People wandered those trails, sometimes returning days later, sometimes never. I'd been out here before on similar calls, and yet every time there was that knot in my stomach, that tiny whisper in the back of my mind reminding me that the forest didn't care who came and went. I packed the essentials, first aid kit, spare batteries, that kind of thing. As I drove towards the trailhead, the sun was low, casting long, crooked shadows across the dirt roads. The forest ahead was dense, its edges dark and almost tactile, like a wall of green waiting to swallow me. I checked my radio and scanner, listened to the usual chatter from the station. There was nothing unusual, but still, there was this heaviness in the air, a tension you could feel in your chest as you breathed in. The locals always whispered about this place, how easy it was to get turned around, how the trees themselves seemed to shift if you weren't paying attention. Stories of people disappearing weren't rare. Sometimes it was bad weather, other times reckless wandering, but occasionally, well, nobody really talked about the times that didn't make sense. I parked near the trailhead, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I stepped out. The wind stirred, brushing against the side of my face, just carrying that scent of damp earth and leaves. It was quiet, no birds, just the occasional creak of an old tree swaying in the breeze. I adjusted my pack, tightened the straps, feeling that familiar mix of readiness and unease. I told myself it was just another search, routine. People go missing all the time. But as I took those first steps out onto the trail, everything just seemed a little too dark, shadows brushing past a little too fast. My pulse quickened, though I tried to ignore it. Somewhere deep down I already knew that this time it just felt different. Hours had passed since I left the trailhead. The sun dipped lower behind the canopy, slicing the forest into long, uneven shadows. Every step I took crunched over dry leaves and broken twigs, and with every crack of wood beneath my boots, I felt eyes on me. Not distant ones, but close, almost brushing against the back of my neck. I told myself it was just paranoia. The forest plays tricks on you. Trees sway, shadows shift, but it didn't feel natural. That sense of being watched just pressed against me. It was subtle but insistent, making me turn my head every few seconds. I glanced down and I saw it. A hiking stick, bent almost in half buried under thin layers of leaves. Nearby, some fabric hung from a branch, torn and frayed. It was snagged on the rough bark as though someone had been pulled or had pulled themselves through in a hurry. I felt my stomach twist. These signs were unmistakable. A struggle had taken place. I stepped closer. I examined the scene. My flashlight cutting swaths of pale light across the undergrowth. Every rational part of me catalogued the details, but another part, the part that knew this wasn't just a lost hiker anymore, tightened with an unease. That's when I saw it. Movement fast beneath the trees, just ahead. A flash of something dark, something human-like, but too quick, too fluid to be normal. My heart leapt into my throat and I froze, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Another blink, another step, and it was gone, vanished behind the trunks, like it had never been there at all. I knew instinctively that I wasn't alone anymore, not the missing hiker's presence lingering in the woods, but something watching, something waiting, something that had followed my every step for a while now. And just like that, the forest felt different again, larger and darker, alive in a way that made every crack of wood beneath my boots feel like a drumbeat announcing my presence. I fumbled for my radio. Heart hammering, static hissed, but there was no signal to come through. That's when I noticed the antenna had been snapped clean at the base. My stomach sank. There was no way to call in, no backup. I was completely alone. I took a step back, careful not to disturb anything at the scene. The bent hiking stick and the torn fabric. It told a story, one I didn't want to be erased by stepping too close. Every fibre of my being screamed at me to act, but I had to preserve what little evidence I could. I turned, and then I saw it. Something moved between the trees ahead. It was fast, too fast to be human, too large to be a deer. It was a shadow, but it was tall, it was broad, powerful. It disappeared into the dense undergrowth before I could get a clear look. My pulse spiked. I froze again, trying to catch my breath, steady my shaking hands. I couldn't identify it, I couldn't rationalize it, but I knew. I just knew I was being watched. The forest seemed silent, yet the presence of something large and predatory pressed in around me. I swallowed hard, keeping my distance from the struggle site. I tried to plan my next move. The creature was out there somewhere. It was fast, it was strong, it was patient. I was very, very alone. I decided that I needed to get back to the car. It was the only way I could call for help. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave this place. Step by step, I retraced the path back. But the forest just felt different. It felt more oppressive. Then it appeared. I barely had time to register it before a massive figure emerged between the trees. It blocked the narrow path. Tall, broad, unnervingly fast. It stood there for just a moment, silent and watching. My heart slammed in my chest. Instinct took over. I veered sharply to the side, desperate to avoid it. Panic setting, branches whipping against my face, roots snagging on my boots. I realised I had no idea which way led back to the car. The forest twisted around me and any sense of direction collapsed. I was completely lost. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. In my frantic zigzagging escape, I stumbled through the undergrowth and tumbled over a mossy root. When I caught my footing, my stomach dropped. I was back at the same scene. The bent hiking stick, the torn fabric snagged on the branches. Evidence of the struggle I'd just tried to preserve. My mind raced. I had been running in circles for who knows how long. Or had the creature been guiding me, hunting me silently, just forcing me deeper and deeper into chaos? I forced myself to take a step back again and try to think. But the forest offered no answers, only the oppressive weight of something unseen waiting for me. I took a deep breath and tried again. I forced myself to push past the panic. I had to get back to the car. I had to call for help. Everything in me screamed I needed to leave, to escape. I forced one step in front of the other, trying to retrace the path that I thought was familiar. Then I stumbled. My foot caught on something half buried in the undergrowth. I tumbled forward, hitting the ground hard. My head spun. I scrambled upright and then I saw. At first I couldn't really comprehend. It was twisted, broken and horrifying. Still, it looked like the remains of the hiker had been searching for. But my stomach turned. The evidence of whatever had happened here hit me with a sickening finality. I barely had time to process it before the blur of movement shot past me again. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Something, or maybe more than one thing, I don't know, moved impossibly fast through the trees around me. Circling, flitting in and out of sight. I couldn't tell how many. Every instinct told me I was being watched, hunted. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The forest just felt alive now, every shadow a threat, every snap of a branch a warning. And I realised with a cold certainty that I wasn't searching anymore. I wasn't in control of anything. I was the prey. With that harsh realisation, my mind snapped into survival mode, fight or flight. There was no thinking, only running. The moment I realised the creatures weren't just shadows or tricks of the trees, adrenaline took over completely. My legs moved before my brain even caught up. Every direction felt wrong, every step seemed to be anticipated. They weren't just following, I could feel them manoeuvring me, forcing me along paths I didn't want to take. Whatever was out there, there was more than one. I could sense it, a rhythm of movement. It was heavy and fast, bounding through the undergrowth, circling, always just out of sight. The glimpses I caught were horrifying. Just tall, impossibly large, their limbs thick and powerful. Moving in an almost animalistic way. They didn't move like people. They leapt, darted, twisted and vanished in an instant, only to reappear a few meters away. Every brush of the wind, every crack of a branch would set my heart hammering again. I just ran blindly. The forest, or whatever this place was now, spinning around me. Panic clouded my senses. But I couldn't stop. I could almost feel them toying with me, driving me further into danger, pushing me to exhaustion. And then, in my frantic dash, the earth just gave beneath me. I tumbled down a steep embankment, hitting rocks and roots on the way down. I landed in a shallow stream. The cold water splashed over me, breaking the momentum but not the terror. I could hear something above me, like a soft thud in the undergrowth, then silence. But it was all too close, it was too fast. I had no idea if it was one or several, but I knew they were still there, just hunting, patient and powerful. I scrambled to my feet, soaked and trembling. My hands shook, my chest heaving, and I realised I had no idea where I was or if there was any way out. I'd lost complete track of time. I stood there by the stream for what felt like forever, bent over, hands braced on my knees, just trying to force air back into my lungs. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning everything out. Cold water swirled around my boots. My feet were numb, but I barely noticed it. I just needed a second to think, just 1 second. Movement caught my eye, just upstream, maybe 30 feet away. Something was drinking from the water. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was too big, and broad-shouldered and hunched low. And it shifted, just rose up to its full height, and my breath just leapt out of me. It was enormous, taller than any man I'd ever seen, with a kind of build that spoke of just raw, coiled strength. The legs were bent slightly, the way an animal might crouch before pouncing. But it wasn't fully animal. The shape was wrong. His body was covered in mottled, coarse fur, patchy in places where scars pulled the skin tight. The head was unmistakably wolf-like. It had a long snout, ears that twitched at the smallest sound, but the eyes, they locked on me with a chilling intelligence. Not the dull curiosity of a wild animal. The thing's chest just rose and fell slowly. It was controlled, and I realised it wasn't surprised to see me at all. It was assessing me, measuring me. Every muscle in my body froze, instinct screaming that if I moved it would close the gap in seconds. My mind flashing back to the speed I'd glimpsed in the trees earlier through the night. Just powerful, unnatural the way they moved. It was one of them. And in that instant, the missing hiker's torn fabric, the bent walking stick, all of it made sense. The reason people never came back from this place. It wasn't accidents, it wasn't bad weather, it wasn't getting lost. It was them. The sound hit me first. Low, deliberate movements in the bush. Not from the one by the stream, but from the others. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them, circling just out of sight. I could hear the twigs snapping and the leaves shifting under heavy steps. What were they waiting for? Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, but I didn't need telling twice. I turned and ran, splashing through the stream, just following it, water spraying up against my legs, but I didn't care. It was the only thing I knew for certain would lead me out of this place. The sounds followed. Not a sprint, but it was measured, controlled movements. They were keeping pace, just tracking me, herding me. My chest burned as I pushed myself faster, lungs pulling in cold, sharp air. The question just pounding in my skull with every footstep. Why didn't they just end it? They could, I knew they could. I'd seen how fast they were. But they didn't. Were they enjoying it? Was this just a game to them? The sky above the trees began to shift, just from an inky black to the first pale streaks of dawn. I caught sight of the sun's rim just breaking over the horizon. My legs were screaming for me to stop, but I didn't dare. I don't know how long I'd been running. I didn't look back. The forest thinned, the ground hardened finally. And suddenly I was out. My car sat there just up the hill. Morning dew clinging to the metal. It looked almost unreal after the nightmare I'd just been in. I fumbled the door open, practically throwing myself inside. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I didn't breathe again until the engine roared to life. I grabbed the dash mounted radio mic and called it in. I was so panicked, not sure I made any sense of them. I just told them everything I'd seen, everything I'd found. My voice cracked more than once. There was a pause on the other end, then questions. So many questions. They wanted exact locations, times, what I meant by remains. By the time backup was sent, I was running on fumes. I met them on the roadside. I guided them in. I didn't want to go back in there, but I had to show them. I had to prove it was real. Only when we got there, it wasn't. The bent hiking stick, gone. Torn fabric snagged in the branches, gone. The scuffed earth, the broken twigs, any sign of a struggle I knew I'd seen. It all looked untouched, as if nothing had ever happened there. Even the place I'd stumbled across where the remains were, it was bare. There was nothing, no sign anyone had ever been there at all. My superiors, but they were exchanging looks like they thought I weren't watching. Quiet conversations just out of earshot. They asked me to repeat my story again and again. Each time their tone just shifted. Less about finding the missing hiker and more about me. They said the pressure had gotten to me, that I'd been out there too long. Maybe confused myself in the dark. When I tried to argue, to tell them I wasn't mistaken, I saw it in their eyes. They'd already made up their minds. No reports were filed. No search continued. It was as if the missing hiker had never existed. I was told to take some time off to clear my head, but I know what I saw. And I know I wasn't the only one out there that night. For years I've tried to bury that night. I told myself I'd imagined it. That the mind plays tricks when you're tired, alone and afraid. But every time another hiker went missing, every time the search came back empty, I thought of them, of the way they moved, of how they didn't just attack, they hunted. The official reports don't match what I saw. The scene I found, gone, the remains, vanished without a trace. And everyone just went along with it. I said I was stressed, maybe losing my grip. But I know the truth. And I know I can't keep it to myself any longer. I've been studying maps, tracking disappearances, looking for patterns. The same stretch of forest over and over again. So tomorrow I'm going back. Not as a cop, not as a rescuer, but as someone who's ready to bring back proof. Because if I don't, they'll just keep hunting. And no one will ever know why so many never come back.